Welcome to the Technogym Village. Today, I am joined again by Professor Robert Newton, a world-renowned expert in exercise science. Welcome.
Thanks, Deena. It's fantastic to be talking to you again.
So excited to dive in. Today's topic, we are going to be talking about how strength training fits into sports, how it helps us perform better, how it helps us recover faster, and how we avoid injuries. So, without further ado, let's get started.
Let's go.
We often break down strength into maximal, explosive, and other neuromuscular qualities. Is the training required to achieve these very different?
It is, and that was interesting because that was the topic of my PhD thesis, which was 30 years ago. And absolutely, the neuromuscular system responds exceptionally specifically to the imposed demands. So increasing maximal strength requires a very, very different stimulus to increasing maximal power. So maximal power, you would think of a vertical jump or a punch, something which is very fast with high power output. And then again, different for other neuromuscular qualities such as strength endurance. And so we have to train highly specifically. However, there is interaction between those qualities. So for example, you cannot be powerful without first being strong. So you can be strong, but not very powerful. So strength is pretty much an underlying quality, a foundational quality for other qualities such as power and endurance.
Would you say there are certain sports that require all three?
There are certainly particular sports, and they're generally the team sports. And so if you look at a sport like basketball, it does require high strength because you have to manipulate quite large loads, which might be a 100-kilo opposition player. But also you have to have very high power for the jumping, for example. But also endurance. You have to have the ability to repeat jump over and over and over again. So for most team sports, it will require a mixture of those qualities. Which qualities predominate depends on the sport. In a sport like rugby union, or rugby league, which is a high impact, or American football, high impact, maximal strength. If you have a look at a sport like the round ball game, the national game of football, soccer in some countries, then less emphasis on strength. It is more about power for sprinting, kicking, etc.
And endurance.
And endurance, yeah, absolutely.
How do athletes train to develop that strength profile?
To develop that strength profile requires resistance training, and it is problematic because some sports, strength training is not part of their culture. Some coaches still believe that strength training, resistance training, will actually impede other aspects of the sport performance, such as skills or even running speed. That's not the case. There's no evidence to support that, but still they have this belief that if my athletes do strength training, they won't be able to kick the ball as well, or their jump shot accuracy won't be as good. That's not really true. We need to change that narrative. So to develop the particularly strength, it requires regular resistance training. It needs to be periodized, so it cycles through different types of resistance training, through volumes and intensities, starting out with emphasis on muscle growth with hypertrophy training, so higher volume load, more repetitions, more variety in the exercises, but then moving towards heavier lifts, getting down to perhaps even singles, doubles, or lifts of 3 there to maximise the strength development.
Okay, so lots of moving parts.
Lots of moving parts. It can be quite complex.
You published a comprehensive review in Sports Medicine suggesting that not all strength is created equal. How does constant variable and accommodating strength, how do those differ from one another?
Again, even within the overall quality of strength, so maximal force production, it is different depending on the muscle action that is occurring. So for example, static or isometric strength is a slightly different quality to dynamic strength. Strength expression in slow movements, when you're lifting a fairly heavy object, you have to move slowly, is different to strength being exerted at a high velocity. So even within strength itself, you have different conditions and ways in which it can be expressed, and also that aligns with different ways to train. different types of strength, if you like, as well. So that does make it very complicated in terms of how that is actually managed. And normally that's done through just providing a variety of training stimuli. Certainly strength diagnosis, which is the assessment of the level of the athlete's capabilities in each of those qualities, can then be used to inform the design of the training program. So qualities which they are most deficient in are the ones that should be targeted as a priority, if that quality is important to the sport, of course. Some strength qualities may not be important to a particular sport. So you have to first work out what are the strength qualities which are critical for this sport, assess those in the individual athlete, and then target those in which they have a deficit or they're relatively weak in.
Even though you have your priority,
yes,
does that mean you forget about the other qualities of training, or do you need to tailor to each one?
It is all about emphasis. So if in a particular phase of training you are concentrating on the development of maximal strength, then particularly if the athlete is in season, you can't allow power performance to decline. This has been a criticism of maximal strength training by coaches, is that, hang on, I sent my athlete off to the weight room and they were doing maximal strength training and their jump height and running speed decreased. That's because you're changing the machine that they've got to drive. If you like, you're changing the car. And so, yes, it will take a while for them to learn how to drive that new car. If we're emphasising strength, we would still incorporate power training, so jumping, sprinting, etc., perhaps a lower dosage, but to allow the athlete to continue to learn how to use their new machinery, if you like. Also, strength training and hypertrophy training has to be maintained throughout the season. In many models, what we see is that they will train well in the off-season, focusing on muscle size and strength, but then stop when the season starts. So what happens is that their strength and muscle size declines over the course of the season. So when you get to the finals, hopefully if the team makes it, the most important games, they're actually weaker than when they started the season. It's not a place you want to be. And so we now know that you have to strength train. Perhaps every 7 to 10 days might be sufficient for maintenance, to ensure that even at the end of the season, they're still really, really strong.
So it's more about structuring it in a way that you can still drive your car. You don't want to shut down completely, and making sure that you're programming it accordingly, depending on their competition needs.
Yes.
Okay. Strength training is often seen as the opposite of endurance, but can building strength actually improve your aerobic capacity as well?
There's been several studies completed which looked at the addition of strength training for endurance athletes, right up to marathon runners, which is obviously the highest level or ultimate in terms of an endurance sport. And what they saw was quite positive benefit in terms of performance. So it appears that adding strength training helps to maintain muscle size and strength, so the actual endurance performance is improved. It's a fine balance though, because too much strength training means that the muscle cells get larger. That means that they're further away from a blood supply and oxygen, and so it can actually negatively impact endurance. So it's a careful balance. So a certain amount of strength training will in general facilitate endurance or maximum aerobic performance, okay, but too much will actually interfere with it.
I was training for my first marathon. I was a sprinter, by the way, so marathon training just wasn't...
Crazy, silly sport.
And I was lifting very, very heavy, and I didn't change my lifting program.
Yes.
So I started to marathon prep, and I think my marathon prep was fine, but the lifting, I didn't change. I got injured right away.
Yeah. It is really much about balancing them out, and that's why we use periodization. So you wouldn't hold one training modality like your strength training at this level and then introduce the endurance training. You would need to actually tone down the strength training during that period. It's all right to then swap them and cycle them as you lead up to the marathon. That's fine, but you can't keep both of them up at the same intensity and volume. No, that's an injury risk.
That's why she's got injured. We live and learn. So it seems like most sports, football, basketball, rugby, they all require strength training. Would you say that there are any sports that don't require strength training?
I get asked this question a lot, and I always struggle to come up with a single sport. The reason why is that the benefits of strength training go beyond just pure performance. So strength training also enhances confidence, resilience. It's particularly important for reducing the risk of injury. So no, I can't think of a single sport for which some form of strength training would not be part of the overall preparation program.
So what you're saying is no matter what sport you do, if you are doing a sport, strength training is going to be beneficial for that, as long as you're managing your intensities properly.
Yes, it'll just be the emphasis on the strength training will change over the different phases, in particularly off-season, preparation, pre-season, and in-season. Yes, it will change. The emphasis will change depending on the sport. For any impact contact sports, wrestling, judo, martial arts, rugby league, rugby union, American football, it's absolutely critical. Okay, a strong person's hard to kill, and a weak person will get hurt. A long-time colleague that I work with, Al Vermeil, was the strength and conditioning coach for the Chicago Bulls in the 90s, and he was involved with them throughout their three-peat when they won 3 NBA titles in a row, which was incredible.
Just a little accomplishment.
A little bit of accomplishment. To be fair, they had Jordan, Pippen.
If I had Michael Jordan on my team.
Luke Longley. It was a pretty good team. But Al always used to say, he said, Rob, don't bring a feather duster to a sword fight. And what he was trying to get across to the players and the coach, you have to be strong. You have to bring a weapon because, this is a very strong physical game and you have to be strong. Other sports, sure. Archery, for example, in very, very fine motor sports like that, possibly the strength training is not such a dominant quality that's required, but it still has a role there somewhere.
You mentioned Stephen Curry, the best shooter, arguably, and even when he entered the NBA, they said, you need some strength training, you're too lean, you're too frail.
Yeah.
And this is someone who has the skill one of the best skills in the world, and even he had to do it.
Yes.
Would you say that strength training can affect skill?
Only if it's implemented incorrectly. If it's implemented poorly and the athlete is sore, that it's not balanced with regular skill training, so they learn how to drive their newly designed F1 car. I mean, F1's a good example. They constantly tinker with the cars, and if you have a look, they'll make a change to an engine or transmission or whatever, and the driver's times actually get worse because the car is potentially faster, but the driver has to adapt their driving style to it. It's exactly the same with the actual motor neuron system. If you change the force output of the muscles, you have to adapt the way in which you activate those muscles to attain the optimal skill. And so, you can mess a person's shooting ability up if it's not done correctly. But as we've seen with Steph Curry, no, if anything, it probably made him better. But he absolutely needed to put on 12, 15 kilos of lean muscle just to be able to cope with the demands of NBA.
Online, you can find information on how the pros train.
Yeah.
And a lot of amateur athletes tend to just go online and copy that. Would you say this is safe?
Well, it's not only not safe, but it's not very effective as well. It's most important to build a very solid strength base, to build the resilience of the connective tissue of the body first, before you start introducing some of these more advanced techniques around strength training and technique. And so you really need to start at the basics. And again, a lot of these circus tricks, let's call it, some of them, they look more like circus tricks than resistance training methodologies. Are great online and they get some likes and some followers and get a bit of traction. But no, it's all about the hype and not about the actual performance and outcome.
What would you say the main differences are between professionals and high amateur training?
Time availability is probably the key one. I mean, obviously a professional athlete, that's their job. They have in particular more time and effort towards recovery, which is a huge advantage. In the high-level amateur athlete, they have to balance life.
Right.
And that can really compromise recovery, and that means that they have to moderate and just manage their actual training loads around that. That creates a new complexity, I think.
Which means the volume could be much higher for a professional athlete than Because they have the time to recover and to...
Yes, yeah, it is much higher, and simply because of the access that they have to recovery modalities, the fact that they can sleep when they like, they can nap in the afternoon, for example, and just some of the recovery modalities that, like cold plunge and etc.
What is the relationship between muscle size and strength, and can it affect overall performance?
There's a very strong direct relationship between muscle size and strength. Much of strength is determined almost entirely by the cross-sectional area of the muscle. So the larger the muscle, then the higher the force output it can produce. There's other morphological factors, so in other words, architectural factors that come into play, such as pronation angle, the angle at which the fibres actually run into the tendon. There's also the relative length of the tendon and the muscle itself. So a whole lot of mechanical factors that do influence it, but they're all secondary to the actual size of the muscle. So bigger muscle, higher force output, higher strength. Strength is not determined purely by the actual muscle characteristics. It's very much determined by the neural activation, the capacity of the brain to actually activate the muscle. And there's many, many mechanisms within that. That is a large part of strength expression, and that is trained by strength training. You're just practicing to lift heavy things, and that gives you quite a large window for adaptation as well on the neural side. So strength is determined by the muscle architecture, in particular size, and the neural factors that also control force of contraction.
I think of someone like Simone Biles, smaller in height, but she's so powerful.
Yes.
And her muscle size must be, compared to maybe someone who has a bigger muscle than she does, but she would be much more powerful than that person.
Absolutely.
So that has to do with the muscle characteristics, not exactly the size.
It is related to the size. Simone would probably be, her power to weight ratio would probably be the highest of probably any athlete on the planet. It's exceptionally high. So for her size, her muscles are large. She's exceptionally muscular, but in particular, her power capacity is very, very high. So that allows her to do the things that she does. But it's her power to weight ratio. For a very large person, they can have huge muscles, but because they're large weight, that's a disadvantage when it comes to power to weight ratio.
Okay. So we're bombarded with pseudoscientific methods that are used to supposedly improve recovery, such as red light therapy, cold plunges, massage guns. I mean, the list goes on.
Yes.
Is there any evidence to suggest that any of this works?
The most important behaviour or activity treatment for recovery is sleep. We recover enormously, both our neural system and all of our muscular system, when we sleep. So the most important thing is to focus on getting that quality 7 to 9 hours of sleep each night. That's why athletes quite often will nap during the day as well. Probably next most significant is recovery of hydration. So water, electrolytes in some instances, if it's a lot of sweat in the heat and you're losing electrolytes and you have to replace them. There is minimal evidence around cold plunge. It does reduce DOMS, but it can also, too much of cold plunge can actually blunt the adaptation process. So adaptation is an inflammation response. If you do the cold plunges, it does actually suppress the inflammation. It's great for recovery and it's great for reducing muscle soreness, etc., but it may actually compromise the training effect. Things like the infrared saunas, the massage guns and things, no benefit at all. They have zero benefit in terms of recovery.
So it sounds like the best tools for recovery are pretty much free.
Pretty much, yeah, absolutely. Even massage, it's got a psychological benefit in terms of relaxation. It has very little to no physiological benefit. There's many aspects like that of some of the recovery that is used. The strategies have some relaxation benefit. Even the compression does have benefit, particularly during travel. So athletes will always wear compression garments. That's super important. It doesn't necessarily aid recovery that much, but it prevents the impact of particularly flight travel.
Myself, I used to do it after a workout. They'd put us in the compression boots. That doesn't necessarily do much.
It's good for the brain. It helps you to relax and it feels nice.
Placebo.
But the evidence around just pure compression does work. But some of the devices that produce an actual pulsating effect like that, the current evidence is that they don't have any benefit in helping you recover. And so for your performance to return back to pre-training levels, they don't facilitate that physiological mechanisms.
Final question. What is the impact of baseline strength on post-match recovery?
That's a very, very interesting and complex question. You never want to go into a competition underprepared, under strength. You wouldn't run a marathon without having done any training. For the same reason, you wouldn't start a football match without having done preparation, and certainly strength training is a big part of that. If you have low strength, you are more likely to get injured because your muscles just simply can't protect your joints. So if you land awkwardly or something, they're not able to contract and stabilise the joint. You do an ankle or you do a knee. So in terms of acute injury, having strength before going into the match is very, very important, but also in terms of the overall impact of the match, in terms of delayed onset muscle soreness and damage and fatigue, certainly having higher strength levels is protective for you. It's a bit of a difficult question because higher strength means you're performing at a higher level. The implementation of fatigue or the causes of fatigue a little bit higher because you're stronger. So it's a little bit hard to say unequivocally that higher strength means better post-match recovery because higher strength means higher performance in the match. Okay, so the post-match recovery is probably going to be similar.
Well, this has all been very, very interesting, Professor Newton. I will certainly remember a few of these things when I'm asked to train an athlete next time around.
Great, thanks, Deena. It's been wonderful chatting with you today.
I hope this conversation has given you a clearer insight into how strength training can improve your athletic performance. And feel free to check out more episodes that we have done with Professor Newton and other interesting topics on our Technogym podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll see you soon. Ciao for now.